AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Our host brings you the leading minds in AI, sharing their story, their success, and their advice. Focusing on fast-tracking you to the top, AI in Action cuts through the hype to help you kickstart your data science career. To listen to the latest AI in Action podcast, head over to www.alldus.com/podcast or subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Hello, welcome to the Alldus podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at Alldus. In today's podcast, as part of our AI in Action series, I'm speaking with Ivan Bilan. Ivan is a data team manager at TrustYou. Ivan, very welcome to the show today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Ivan, tell us a little bit about your background, academic background, a little bit more about your industry background, and right up to now, if you wouldn't mind.
My academic background is mostly in linguistics. So I started first was studying general linguistics and language teaching, and then gradually moved into computational linguistics. And I also studied technology management. From the technical background, so I started my career as a data engineer. So I worked a lot with big data, building ETL pipelines, then eventually moved into a data science role, working with NLP mostly, building NLP pipelines. And then since about a year, I've been a manager, so managing data science and data engineering teams at TrustYou.
For people that don't know TrustYou, what does TrustYou do and the problem that it actually solves?
TrustYou is creating an analytics solution for travel industry, so mostly for hotels and restaurant owners. We are able to collect all possible reviews that, for example, a hotel gets online, and then using our NLP approaches, we can extract sort of various very specific feedback that the guests leave for the hotel. For example, I don't know, the mattress was too hard or the room wasn't clean. So these things we will pick up, and we will also pick them up not only in English, but we support over 20 different languages.
I'm quite interested to know about your NLP experience because you're quite involved within the community as well. And starting off on that linguistics, would you give us a little bit of an overview about that?
As I've said, initially I started in sort of general linguistics, but I eventually learned there was an interesting field called computational linguistics, which is kind of a mix between general linguistics and computer science. And so I really like the idea. So that's when I moved into computational linguistics, working initially a lot with, for example, machine translation, sentiment analysis, and similar tasks. And then eventually, while doing my master's degree in computational linguistics, this was around the time when this new approaches appeared, like these transformer models, or back then they were called self-attention models. And that's what my master's thesis was about. I was actually working with those, trying to adjust the original transformer model to a different task. So it was initially used for machine translation, and I was adjusting it to be used for relation extraction. So through the time when I started computational linguistics, it was first a bit rule-based, then eventually it was more machine learning-based, and then when I was actually finishing my studies, it almost turned into completely deep neural network-based NLP approaches. So I kind of was able to see this gradual progression from different types of NLP approaches. And then I was also eventually able to apply that in the industry. So I've been working at TrustYou for quite a while, and we are also applying a mix of different approaches. So we, for some systems, we use rule-based and machine learning approaches. For other systems, we use the cutting edge NLP language models.
So this is a topic that has got so much demand in terms of interest over the last couple of years, and there's been a few reasons for that as well. Tell us a little bit about how you'd approach an NLP problem. And then later, I'd be quite interested to hear how in TrustYou, you've been very adaptable around the pandemic.
There are many different NLP problems, you could say. So different tasks, how the industry recently have been approaching this. For example, we all heard about GPT and GPT-3, and the idea there is that you try to build sort of a language model that can work on any NLP task. And unfortunately, that's still not something that like a smaller startup or smaller NLP company would be able to use directly. So how it still is in the industry is that the solutions that NLP teams build are still very specific to some task, right? So you usually build a specific NLP model that you train to work on your task. For example, sentiment analysis or machine translation or conversational chatbots and so on. Since you mentioned TrustYou, we actually dimension of languages. First of all, there's a lot of work in the NLP industry that has been done for English, but not all of it is transferable to other languages. So what we do at TrustYou is actually we pay a lot of attention to low resource languages where there's not, for example, not that much data available online. There's not much research available online. So we try to also to make our NLP models work with a broad range of languages. And you also mentioned how we adapted to the pandemic. I think probably a lot of NLP teams had to adapt in some sense, because one of the things that was brought into the language by what's happening now in the world is there has actually been a lot of new terminology and new words coming in, and that is really changing the way how some words are used and changing the way how we now would need to basically retrain and the existing NLP models with the new data. So one good example is at TrustYou, we match phrases, for example, related to drinks and beverages in the hotels and restaurants. And we initially, when all of this started, we saw like a huge surge in the number of matches we got for a category related to drinks. And then we saw that it actually was related to the Corona beer. And so we had to right away adapt our language model, retrain it so that it understands the context of the word Corona, that it has now basically changed. It has shifted. It's not, doesn't mean beer anymore. It also means the virus itself. So that's like one example.
Yeah, it's
adaptation.
It's a good example, Ivan, and it's funny when we were talking last week off air in preparation for this podcast. We were talking about Corona beer, and I looked up to see what was the impact of the pandemic on sales, and because it's part of Anheuser-Busch, the brand is worth around 1.3 billion, but it's lost around 100 million, and it used to be a brand worth about 1.4 billion. But sales have taken a dip, but not necessarily a big dip, where you would have potentially thought it would have a significant impact on it. But maybe in some ways it's become even more recognized as a brand. Tell us a little bit about your approach to NLP pipelines.
There is this in sort of ML, this subfield now called ML ops and data ops, where you try to define what are all the steps that you need to take to build a machine learning model. And NLP, the field of NLP also, I think, has a lot to learn from those approaches. And there are many things that we can take over from there. So how the NLP models usually work. So first, you start, of course, with collecting data. So that's very similar to what you have in machine learning. Although here, the difference is the techniques of gathering the data and techniques of augmenting and sort of changing that data or creating synthetic data is very different to what you have in other ML fields. So you start with data, of course, and then you move on to building your sort of architecture, right? So you start with coming up what would be the best language model type to apply to the problem, and then you build upon that and see what needs to be adapted to a specific task you're working on. And then comes in this part where you do evaluation, first of all, of sort of quality itself. And recently, we've seen a lot of attention being paid to also evaluating not just the quality of results themselves, but also the quality of the model, right? Is it, let's say, for example, is it biased in any way? Does it output some very strange things that it shouldn't, right? We all know the examples from some chatbots like Tay from Microsoft or Luda, where the outcome of those chatbots was very bad. They turned like very racist eventually. So it's something that I think the field of NLP has learned from, that almost everyone now is trying to avoid this, trying to make sure these checks are built in there. And there are also a lot of tools being available now to facilitate that. There's last year, we had a tool called Checklist that has been released. There's another one called Text Attack and similar tools. There's a lot of tooling coming in to support that. And then after that, when you test the model, you obviously need to deploy it. And after that comes the part where you have to observe how the model behaves. So you have to have some sort of data observability and model observability built in, where you check, has the quality of the model decreased over time? Has the data changed? Do you need to retrain it, redeploy it, and so on? So check if there was data drift and things like that. So, and it's basically a life cycle. After you already give it to your clients, it may eventually become outdated. So you have to go back, you have to collect more data, you have to retrain it, and then deploy again. And it's a life cycle basically.
Ivan, your insights are very, very helpful. And for companies now who want to actually start to take advantage of the evolution of NLP, you're a really, really good ambassador for that. And there's so much articles that you've put across in your GitHub and other websites that you've made accessible. It's really helpful, but it's also kind of reflective of the industry in a whole, how people just want to help in this area and add better customer service and try to solve different types of problems. And I've really taken an awful lot from your approach to how you solve NLP problems, how advice on NLP pipelines, and it's really interesting to see how TrustYou have adapted their approach as well. And this is a significant example of true value that's happening in this marketplace.
I would just like to add, the NLP community itself is very open. I think everyone is ready to help. There are many open source frameworks. There are many like open source collections of different NLP topics. I'm the maintainer of something called NLP Pandect. So it's a GitHub repository where I basically collect and categorize different topics related to NLP and different frameworks, different blogs and papers. So if you're starting out with NLP, or if you want to approach a specific NLP problem, you can go there. I hope will find a specific problem there, and then you'll find some resources to start you off, basically.
You've been listening to the Alldus podcast, part of our AI in Action series. Today, I'll be speaking to Ivan Bilan. Ivan is Data Team Manager at TrustYou, and we've been talking a little bit about TrustYou, the work that they're doing, some of the problems they're solving, and some of the interesting applications of NLP, how you can actually take advice from NLP pipelines journey from Ivan's experience, Pandect, the accessibility to learning more about NLP online, and just how open the NLP community is and some of the interesting applications going forward. Ivan, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
AI in Action is brought to you by Alldus International, covering your business's staffing, consulting, and networking needs. Alldus offer an exec search program. Alldus can help you discover how data science and AI can transform your company. With our unrivaled network of C-suite executives and senior AI professionals, we offer retained search services across the US and Europe. Get the Alldus advantage. Become a member of the Alldus community and enjoy some of the following: AI meetups. Once a month, our community gathers to listen to some of the leading experts in the world of data science and AI. Our speakers come from all over the world, including Dublin, Boston, and Frankfurt. We also have our AI mentors. Our experts will provide mentoring to Alldus members. And don't forget our AI in Action podcast. Each week we have guests from all over the world talking us through their education, career, and more. Become an Alldus member and get the Alldus advantage. For more information and to sign up for our newsletter, log on to www.alldus.com. That's www.alldus.com. Alldus International, empowering through AI.